Om Namasri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. To continue with our Raj Yoga class, last time we discussed and we saw that Swamiji is very clearly telling us that prana is used not only for all the five pranas that are animating the human body, but it is also, the mind is also called as one of the pranas. As you say, the five indriyas of knowledge, objects, are seen and perceived by these five organs of knowledge, and they are communicated to the mind. So it is the mind which conveys it to the buddhi, the another faculty of the mind, which then decides what is to be done with the input that one gets. So in a sense, mind is also called a prana. It is, this prana is a kind of force. So the mind stuff or the chitta, as we have very often discussed, this point has to be made very clear. The mind has four levels or four modes, you can say, of operation. The first mode is the manas, which is the reactive mind, which merely acts as a sixth sense. Sometimes we say there are five senses and we have a sixth sense, as it were, which conveys or coordinates or makes the inputs that one has received from the five senses. For example, you see something, you hear something, you also taste something at the same time. For all the five senses, suppose they are operating. So the mind has to convey this information. The mind, which is the reactive mind, conveys it to the centers in the brain, and that those centers in the brain enable the mind to perceive. Now, after perception takes place, these five senses and the sixth sense, which you can say is the mind itself, the reactive mind itself. But the reactive mind does not pass any judgment. It does not decide what you see is good or bad, or whether you should accept it, or how should one accept it, how should one react to it, or whether one should not react to it. So many things are concerned concerned with this buddhi. They are the functions of the buddhi. So the buddhi decides whether how to react to a particular impulse which we get through one or all of these sense organs. Sometimes so many things happen simultaneously. People think that first one hears, then one sees, and then one tastes. No, all these things happen so fast that they appear to be simultaneous. Though the mind, they say, can be attached to one particular task at a time. That is why, though multitasking is advisable, multitasking can be a very big strain, because the mind goes on jumping from one sense organ to the other with great rapidity, and too much of this input, confusing input, that it leads to stress. So very often you find that a mind which is not used to multitasking, if it tries to do that, it exhausts itself. The mind becomes tired after some time. You can't do many things at a time. That is why, for the sake of better meditation, if somebody wants to meditate properly, then one has to focus on one thing at a time. Swami Vivekananda exhibited this when he was reading any book, or even a very simple book, a light book like Pickwick Papers. Somebody entered the room from the door and silently came and stood before Swamiji. So, but he was so keen and absorbed in reading that he did not hear the person. He literally did not hear, though he might, the sound must have come, but the brain was trained in such a way, the mind was trained in such a way that it was focused on one particular sense, that is eyes. He was seeing something and he was reading that book, and the concentration was so deep that it did not allow the sound which came to disturb him. So that is what is meant by concentration. So multitasking, actually, though we think we are doing so many tasks at a time, for example, you are reading something and a TV is going on, some music is going on. Some people like to do many things at a time, though it may give them some kind of uh, relief from boredom, but in the ultimate run, in the ultimate uh, analysis, you will find that it exhausts a person a lot. So one has to avoid multitasking and do one thing at a time, because that is how the mind is trained, or the mind is built in such a way that it can convey one impulse to the brain, then successively it creates an impression of continuity, though the impulses are many. So just as you know, to get a semblance of a movie, you need 16 frames per second normally. 16 different frames per second gives you an idea of motion. If you want to analyze the films, earlier days when the movie industry was just in its infancy, there were, say, in the reel, if you find, it has to move 16 frames in 1 second. The reel which was used, the film reel, it used to pass so fast that 16 frames, small frames, would pass through the light. The light would pass through these frames. And when the 16 frames pass in 1 second, then you get an idea, a continuous effect that something is moving. So similarly, when you try to see certain things, listen to certain things, there are so many impulses. The reactive mind is always receiving impulses. That is why Thakur used to say, now and then you should go to solitude, because you give some rest to the mind. Your mind needs not only the sense organ. Sense organ will simply convey it to the mind. It is the mind that requires rest. The reactive mind, if it is always reacting, always exposed to uh, uh, different kinds of inputs. For example, now social media, and that's why they say don't give the remote to the child, because he keeps on changing the channel. If there is a TV channel or any other game or anything, if one gets bombarded by so many changes, it creates a great impact on the mind and affects the concentration. Certain diseases like ADHD, uh, attention deficiency due to hyperactivity disorder. It is known as the attention deficiency, which is created. One cannot focus on certain things because of hyperactivity. Now, this hyperactivity is not just a samskar, it has been created over several lives. And also, it has been, I mean, when the child grows up, if one does not take care, the parents do not take care, then the attention deficiency will increase, the hyperactivity also will increase. So one has to be very careful, and one has to teach the children to sit quiet and do single tasking when they are focusing on their homework or anything, or even when they are watching something. Tell them not to change the channels, go on keeping on changing. uh, any kind of rapid change, and it affects the mind. The mind gets tense, the mind, there is a lot of stress which is induced because of the signals which are coming in rapid succession. You see something, then the advertisement changes, you see some changes in advertisements, and then something pops up, and then your attention is diverted. You cannot focus even when you are seeing something, some video or something. If you can't focus on it for a particular length of time, then the mind gets confused. So this bombarding, or maybe an superabundance of choice which a human being now in modern society has got, so much of media is there. So this choice makes him confused, and that leads to lack of concentration. So the chitta, the mind stuff, it is the engine which draws in the prana from the surroundings, manufactures out of that prana the various vital forces that keep the body in preservation. And thought, willpower, and all other powers of the mind of the human personality depend on that. So the chitta one has to be very careful to see that the chitta, the mind stuff, is not flooded with lot of samskaras which are not very useful to the child or to any growing up personality. If there are too many things, too many distractions, the prana gets disturbed, and that affects the body. The very fact that these five pranas keep the body in preservation, it preserves the body, it allows it to function properly, it allows the brain to function properly, take proper decisions. So the buddhi and the one of the prana which is very important is the process of breathing is connected with that. That is the nerve currents that are running through the body. We have to understand these nerve currents are disturbed when the prana is disturbed, when the breathing is disturbed, when there are so many inputs and the human mind cannot take control of it. The five pranas are haphazardly handled by a person. One is not trained to handle this, harmonize these pranas, and that is why pranayama is prescribed. Because if along with pranayama you focus the mind also, because mind is also a prana, you focus the breathing, and then you think or then you imagine that the other pranas are also slowly coming under control. What are the other pranas? To recapitulate, the other pranas other than the breathing and the heartbeat and other things are digestion, that is samanvayu, the assimilation and digestion. So that is affected by the wrong breathing or the wrong thinking process. Lack of concentration disturbs that also. And then we have other pranas, like we have the apana vayu, which gives rise to indigestion or digestion. Its function is to remove the waste material from the body. So it's a downward force, even if that requires regulation. Otherwise, you have so many diseases like constipation and other things. So that apana vayu also should not be disturbed. Prana, apana, samana. Samana is the digestion, as I said. Then vyana. The vyana vayu is the nerve currents which we feel in the body, which are so important because these nervous association of the various inputs with the various inputs that you get, and finally is presented to the mind. What is the nervous impulse? Are you becoming very impulsive in one's behavior? Does one, as soon as he sees certain things, does he get irritated? Does he get angry? Does he get upset? So these are the nervous reactions. So one of the goal of yoga to control of this prana is to control the vyana vayu also, the nervous current. So the nerves are not obeying our orders. They are just responding to external stimulus. And that is why you see people have this habit of smoking and coffee and certain things which try to activate the nervous system artificially, but that is not a good solution. One has to do from within. Breathing is one of the techniques, pranayama is one of the techniques through which your nervous energy can be restrained and can be made through to flow through proper channels. That is one of the goals of yoga. And these nervous energy, as I said, we have to first recognize how they are flowing in our body. They are flowing through two nerves which are joined to each other, which is known as the spinal cord. So any student of physiology knows that there is one efferent nerve and an efferent nerve. And the functions of those two are very well known. So one is called Ida. The Pingala is on the right, Ida is on the left side of the body of the spinal cord. So within the spinal cord is a hollow with a cerebrospinal fluid, and the Ida and Pingala, according to the yogis, every person who is not a yogi or who is yet to become spiritual uses only these two chords. The sushumna or the hollow is not used at all. So with this, we perform all the functions. So whenever there is an imbalance in the Ida or the Pingala, if suppose the currents are blocked and they do not reach the brain, then the response time, you will find in autism and other certain physiological disorders, certain sickness, the time of response, the way they respond to external stimulus is somehow disturbed because of the fault either in the brain centers or in the nerves that convey it to the brain centers. Some damage is there. Unless the body is also perfect, it is very difficult to get a hold on these nerve currents. The nerve currents do not reach, and then we have so many diseases which are psychological disorders and other things. That is because the prana, the Vyanavayu, the nervous currents are not flowing as they should. The response and to the stimulus should be immediate. And not only that, the discriminative power, the focus or the concentration with which buddhi is developed. That is why so much of importance is given to solitude and meditation, because that helps us to catch hold of our mind, to understand its vagaries, the different vibrations, to understand the vibrations of the nerves and see how they not only affect our mind but also certain body changes also take place. Swamiji says Sushumna is present in all, but it works only in a yogi. Now a few words of warning or caution regarding this passing of the nerve current through Sushumna. Now it is very, very rare that a person who is not a yogi, who does not practice the basic moral virtues of spirituality, will ever succeed in awakening the Sushumna. It can be done by force sometimes, but even if it is done, it can be more harmful than beneficial. It's better not to uh, be affected by the Sushumna, not to be forcing. If we try to force the spiritual current, the instead of Ida and Pingala, that itself is so difficult for us to handle. We cannot respond properly to stimulus. We cannot control our reactions. We get angry soon. We get upset soon. We get depressed soon. There's so many psychological problems because of the malfunction of both Ida and Pingala. So leave alone Sushumna before we even come to that stage where the Kundalini rises. So, and Kundalini, mind you, is very, very, very difficult for a ordinary human being to make the nerve currents pass through the Sushumna. It is not as easy as it appears in the book. In the books, a lot of people ask questions. They keep on asking questions. My Kundalini is coming up to the chest, and my Kundalini is coming up to the heart. It goes up to the throat, and I get this feeling, some kind of itching sensation, burning sensation, some light comes. They're all hallucination. No Kundalini has ever risen in any person. If Kundalini were, if it were to be so easy, then everybody would have become a yogi. So Swamiji says one has to be very rational when the nerve channels are created, especially when these new thoughts. The conservative nature of human being is to pass the nervous current through Ida and Pingala alone. That is how human beings are built, right from the animal, all vertebrate animals, to human beings. Everybody responds and has a mechanism which has been evolved, which has evolved over centuries. For many centuries, this mechanism has evolved, and our responses have been regulated or controlled using this Ida and Pingala alone. And it's not every day that you get somebody who can practice yoga and make the nerve currents pass through the Sushumna. So Swamiji says it is not only difficult, but it is dangerous if by some technique or some force, if it rises, if at all it rises, it won't rise. So many of the ailments or many of the visions, experiences, and other tingling sensations, etc., we find in a spine are just physiological. Maybe there is some problem in the posture, or maybe some posture which is not good, which we have been sitting in a wrong posture for a long time, or there is some injury. Then you can start feeling some sensations in the spinal cord. That has nothing to do with the kundalini. The effect of kundalini, even vision, some people say, then how do I get all these different the visions? They are just hallucinations. It is a strong imagination. When the nerves get connected, when there is a wrong connection, then these nerves, they pass through Ida and Pingala, but the mind gives it a kind of feeling that you are seeing something. It is not a very unnatural thing, it's a very natural thing. It is just like dream. In dream, you can sometimes imagine things which you can never do in the waking state. How does it happen? Because in the dream, the will is not connected. It can get connected to any image, and that is why in dream you can see fantastic things, and you imagine that you are really doing that. But when you come to the ground reality, when you wake up, you see, oh, you have been flying in the air, but suddenly you are on the bed, you are on the ground. So all these imaginative things which you see in the dream, a stronger reproduction of the same thing is nothing, is a hallucination. So most of our things which we imagine, it is because of strong imagination, lack of sleep. During the waking state, we get such different types of hallucinations. They are just dreams. They are just dreams in a waking state. It is some kind of strong daydream, you can say. A strong daydream, when your nervous system becomes a little defective and you start seeing things. It has absolutely nothing to do with the rise of Kundalini. This is one warning I would like to give you. Swamiji also mentions that. It is so difficult because the conservative mind or the conservative brain, it has a tendency to be conservative. If you have been doing certain things, if you have been leading a particular kind of life for days and years together, and suddenly you can't expect to have these spiritual experiences, unless of course there is a powerful force. An avatara can undo all your samskaras and give you these experiences. That is very, very rare. An ordinary human being or even an ordinary guru cannot do it for you. Rest assured that other than Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda himself said, though he had the capacity to give this kind of visions to people, but he did it only if he found even a great soul, a pure soul like Abhedananda. When Swami Vivekananda touched him, he managed to transfer some kind of power, which you may say, and the Kundalini rose. But Thakur warned him. He said, "What have you done? You have disturbed his mood. He was progressing in a particular way. I was guiding him in a particular way, and you just tried to do something and force your views on him. So that you should not do." So that is the danger. That is why Swami Vivekananda, after that, he never used any of his powers. He wanted everybody to develop their own spirituality through regular practice. The only thing that a guru does is try to give certain instructions and make the disciple. For the yogi has to take instructions and has to be guided so that he does not fall a prey to different hallucinations. So Swamiji says, he gave a beautiful example. See, for example, the brain is a soft substance like a lump of clay, and the mind is like a needle. So every thought that we think makes a groove, it makes a street, and the gray matter comes and makes a lining to keep that street from getting wiped out. So that's why if there was no gray matter, there would be no memory. So the chitta or the memory is nothing but different sequences or different lines in the brain because of repeated thoughts. So repeated thoughts or repeated habits create these samskaras. Samskaras are nothing but grooves. So there is a tendency, as I told you, in a old gramophone record, when the needle passes through a certain uh, groove in the gramophone disc, the music is produced because of the way the groove has been engraved on that. So it will play only that music. It will give only rise to those thoughts. So every thought creates an engraving on the brain, and the gray matter creates a lining so that it is not wiped out. Of course, after long, because of long disuse, when we have Alzheimer's and all these different kinds of diseases, these linings are closed mysteriously. The brain functions go on slowly becoming weaker and weaker, and then you say you don't remember things. You don't remember, but very very old thing, childhood things, even the old people remember, even in spite of all the different diseases of the due to old age. They have a very strong memory of the childhood, because when when the mind is young, when the body is young, the brain also creates these grooves which are far deeper than those which are created in old age. That is why people are told to practice spirituality and practice japa, meditation, and do whatever you want at an early age, because after the age, in fact Brahmananji said after 32 it is very difficult, but still he used to say whatever you have to do, please do it between the age of 16 and 32. And after that, the brain slowly loses its capacity to find make these new channels. This memory becomes faint. The memory is not as good as it was when you were young. When you were young, and if assuming that one led a pure life, then the uh, the capacity of the brain to remember things is very good. That is why when Swami Vivekananda was asked by his disciple that how could he have this kind of wonderful memory, because Swami Vivekananda could remember so many things. He could read the encyclopedia and remember every word verbatim. He used to read one volume after another, and after in a few days he completed the 10 volumes. And the disciple was surprised. He said, did you really read it, or have you just glanced through it? Then he said, you ask me any question. So Sharat Chandra Chakravarti asked him certain questions. This happened in Belur Math. Then he was astounded. He said, how can one remember so many things? It takes a lifetime of study to remember all the things that you read, especially from a book like Encyclopedia Britannica. It's not something, there are so many subjects and so many topics there. So how can one possibly remember? The brain, though it has the capacity, because of lack of purity of mind. That is why Swamiji says, unless you practice some kind of celibacy or brahmacharya for 12 years, then he says a special nerve which is known as Medha Nadi. The Swamiji has very clearly said. He said, you know why I remember all these things, why my memory is so strong. Sharat Chandra was not able, he thought it is some supernatural power. He said, no, there is no supernatural power at all involved. It is just the capacity of the it's the power that is generated through uh, physical and mental purity. If that is maintained for, he said, for a period of 12 years non-stop, then one can attain to such wonderful feats of memory. But though that is not the only way, all people don't use that that wonderful memory, because they are not bothered about any other memory. Like Sri Ramakrishna, for example, his only idea was to use the memory of his relationship with Divine Mother. The bhakti or the jnana and all the spiritual truths was the only thing he wanted to remember. He did not care for anything in the world. That is why he did not like even the newspapers. He said, why should I waste my time? He was focusing on certain things, and that concentration helped him to go into depth and experience the spiritual truths, which he did by his wonderful life of purity as well as concentration. So he had his nervous system in so much control that he could, according to his wish, he could control the samskaras, he could make the nervous current pass through the kundalini. Very often you see Thakur goes into samadhi. It's not a commonplace thing. Even Swamiji and all the other disciples found it so difficult to make the Kundalini rise. So one thing one has to remember when Swamiji warns us that it unconsciously also, if one tries to force and one thinks that the power of Kundalini is being raised. Kundalini is nothing but the power which lies at the base of the spine, and it is, they say, it is like a snake which has been coiled. They give the example of a snake. There's no snake involved at all. It is just a comparison that a snake which is coiled and sitting down, if somebody wakes up the snake, then it goes up and spreads its hood and tries to bite and act. So that is why the Kundalini has been described as a coiled up snake. And Swamiji also in his logo, he says Raj Yoga is nothing but the awakening of this Kundalini through the 8 steps of yoga and a systematic process of niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Then we have dharana, dhyana, and then samadhi. So this Kundalini, rise of Kundalini is a very rare thing to be done under the guidance of a guru or maybe a great yogi or an avatara purusha. Without that, if somebody says once Kundalini has risen, it is just a figment of imagination of a fertile brain, because there are a lot of books which have uh, made have trivialized the concept of Kundalini. People think it's a commonplace occurrence, and they think this Kundalini is something which rises in every person. That is one misunderstanding which Swami Vivekananda very clearly says. One has to be very rational in life. One cannot just go by emotions and uh, get an emotional idea of these different things and feel or dream that one has these visions and one's Kundalini is rising and all those things. That is why the psychology which deals with the inner nature of man has to be understood properly if one's external nature. So there are so many do's and don'ts, or yama and niyama, where which people neglect. They just go to pranayama. So Swamiji says for that, to cut new channels in the brain, to practice yoga, because a new set of thoughts and motives have been created. A spiritual orientation to life has been chosen. Then, when it is done, then there will be some reaction. So that's why the psychology which deals with the inner nature of man, about concentration, these have to be taught as much as we teach the children the external, how to organize oneself in the external world. We have so many courses: academic excellence, for academic excellence, multitasking and doing so many things, managing computers, managing life, managing balance, finances. We teach almost everything in the external world to the child, and he think that he's an excellent uh, uh, personality. He has such a wonderful external personality that he can deal with any situation, or because of his skills. That is one part of the external training of the mind. That is fine. Those are skill trainings which one has to excel, if one has to excel in, but that is the only 50% of our personality. Swamiji says the inner nature of man, the control of one's own mind, is neglected. Because when you focus more on the external nature, on your sense organs, on your capacity to understand things, the intellectual development, then the inner life suffers. The psychology which deals with the inner life of man, the yoga psychology, suffers. And if that is not taken care of, it is very difficult to handle that personality. As he grows, it becomes more and more difficult. So you can't become a yogi when you have finished 30, 40, 50 years, you are already uh, spent in wasting time. And then you suddenly decide, now I have to go to practice yoga. It becomes very difficult because the brain doesn't have the capacity. So Swamiji then says, we must remember that in this world of ours, only infinite, it is only the infinite existence, the infinite consciousness, only a part of that has been projected in our plane of consciousness. There are many things which we don't understand, which we don't, the psychology of which we don't understand. And with this little consciousness or little understanding of the human mind, we call this is our world. Oh, I believe in this, I believe in that, I will do that, I will do this activity, and he thinks he knows everything. But when problems come, when challenges come, he is not only able to deal with them externally, but internally also. Internally, it is more difficult to deal with the problem. You can perhaps solve the problem, or you can manage stress, you can manage so many things externally, but that is just postponing the inevitable. They are going to come back. Temporary, you may get a relief, you may take some medicines and cure yourself, but again and again you have to go to the doctor and get it cured. But so yoga tells us that that infinite consciousness, if it is manifested and used to develop the internal world, so any religion or any yoga or any endeavor which deals with only one, the external aspect, is defective. Swamiji says that which has come into the plane of consciousness, that which deals with the part of the infinite, which deals with the external world, and in the cage of time, space, and causation. See, we are caught in a cage of time, space, and causation. We plan so many things. We have our idea of space, and we have our idea of result. We do certain things uh, with certain rules of causation. If we think, if we invest so much money, we'll get so much money. That's the law of principle, law of causation that we are using in our daily life. Space, we want bigger houses, we want bigger cars. We live in time. We plan that after 10 years I should be a millionaire. After that, maybe after 25 years I should be a billionaire. So the idea of time, space, and causation are frequently used. We are imprisoned in that. We restrict ourselves to time, space, and causation. We never think of the infinite power which is beyond this, which comes from that infinite consciousness, or Atman, and or the Brahman as a reality, or the Purusha as in the case of, as it is defined in the case of yoga. That consciousness, if we try to manifest more and more of it, especially through the mind, then then our personality will be balanced. Will be good in the external world, will be good in the internal world. But there are certain rules. You can't just bypass those rules in the external world. There are these yamas and niyamas. They are exactly meant for the external world. That is why Patanjali begins with the most gross things. What to do, what not to do. Yama and niyama we have discussed so many times in the introduction also. So I'm not repeating it. There are these 5 things which we have to do as moral values, and 5 things are internal moral values. 5 are external and 5 are internal. So there are 10 yamas and niyamas which we discussed, like brahmacharya, like not speaking untruth, asteya, satya, asteya, not robbery, not taking that which is not ours, not stealing certain things, not trying to get what we really don't deserve. If we don't work hard and if we just expect to get a windfall and just get certain things without having the merit to get it, or without really deserving it, then it can become a state. It belongs to somebody else. We just grab it. So those values, if they are not practiced, then the yoga, the foundation of yoga collapses and a person suffers. So that part of religion which deals with the internal control, not just external control, if we know the technique of that, and see that these spiritual channels are created in the brain and they do not disturb the whole system. And that is why ordinary people, the practice of yoga, most of the ordinary people find that there is a reaction. One has to be very slow and careful. It's a painful and a slow process. Even earning money or any success in life, if you want, Even to learn a simple instrument, you have to put in years and years of practice. Only after putting in years and years of practice, you learn. You just can't take a instrument and start playing it. So ordinary people who try yoga, they just want some immediate result, as they want instant food, and like pizzas and all, instant food has become a hit now. So we can't have instant yoga, no matter how much advertisement is being done. There are people who promise that kundalini will rise and the shakti will be transferred, and it's all humbug. It's all a big kind of cheating, because these things, yoga cannot be first learnt without a tradition to uh, follow, or maybe if it has not come down in a tradition. Whatever we do, whether it is Raj Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, or Jnani Yoga, the parampara is very important. That is why Shankaracharya, he does not say knowledge which you get from a parampara. He says Guru Parampara Gata Jnana. Guru means just a succession of people who hand over. It is just like a succession of teachers who have taught physics. The teacher who is now teaching, he has learned from some teacher who is an excellent. The better the teacher from whom he has learned, the better that student becomes, and he becomes a better professor. That's a very simple logic. Even in secular knowledge, you seek, you just don't go to a novice who has just read some physics books by himself, though it is possible to get knowledge that way, but you don't go to such a teacher. You want an experienced teacher who has been who has gone through a university system, had some gurus who taught him physics, and then only you have faith that I can learn from this. But in spirituality, we are so blind that we don't even consider who from whom we are uh, getting knowledge, which book we are reading. Are we reading a book which has been written by somebody who has experienced it, who has followed a particular tradition? So Shankaracharya says Guru Parampara Gata Jnana. He always insists on some knowledge which has come from Guru Parampara. I don't know, but there are gurus, a tradition which has come down to us. And Shankaracharya is humble enough to say that I am just giving you what I learned from my guru and what he learned from his guru. And I can trace that, and I can show that I am not telling some cock and bull story. Either it has come from a Guru Parampara, it has based on real experience, as after following it as shown by my guru. So Patanjali says, I am not the founder of yoga. If you think Patanjali's Yoga Sutras were not there, or the ideas were not there before Patanjali, Patanjali has just classified it. He has got this knowledge from a Guru Parampara, and he has just analyzed it. He has tried to collect his experiences and put it in book form, in the form of sutras. And then he says, he tries to explain. The commentators, his disciples, or people who followed his school, the disciples who followed the school of yoga or the philosophy of yoga, they wrote commentaries based on what they learned from their own gurus. So somewhere you can see, you can trace the origin to some person. Without that, just as your degree, if it is taken from some wayside university, has no value. If you really want the yoga or any of these spiritual techniques, it has to come from a well-established tradition with a history behind it and a great tradition of gurus behind it. If that is not there, if great tradition of teachers, the word guru is used even in the secular sense. You say he's a guru of physics. I mean, he's my teacher. And we give so much importance. Oh, I learned from such and such a person, such and such a person who was educated in Oxford. Why do we say that? Because we know that if he has come from Oxford, he has learned from somebody who was competent enough to teach that subject. He would have been perhaps one of the best, if not the best in the world. Some of the best teachers, if they have taught this person and I learn under him, then it is always better. So that's why Swamiji says, we may practice anything, taking up this Yoga Sutras and practice anything, but we have to learn the individual techniques. Patanjali just gives you the sutras so that they serve as guidelines. you cannot go beyond that. He just says, be careful. This is what the verse number 34, he says you can do it through pranayama, but to understand that we need commentators. Swami Vivekananda's Raj Yoga is one of the commentaries. There are so many other commentaries. He referred to Vyasa's commentary, he referred to Bodha Vritti, which was written by other scholars. So Bhoja, not Bodha, Bhoja Vritti. So there are two commentaries which Swamiji referred, but then he practiced this yoga, and based on his own experiences, based on the teaching of his guru, based on the experiences which he got in contact with his own guru Sri Ramakrishna, he has written this commentary because he wanted to leave behind such a small explanation, a beautiful explanation of the verses of Patanjali's yoga, which if one has to understand, they're sutras, they're very terse and short sentences. We can't make out the exact meaning without these commentaries. That is why that those sutras have to be understood in the light of Swami Vivekananda's explanation, or which is also based on some of the ideas which Vyasa and Bhoja in their commentaries they have given. They are recognized commentaries. So Swamiji had these books brought. He made a study of these things and tried to give an explanation based on these two plus other commentaries and also based on his own experience. Now, verse number 35, we have just 3 minutes, so let me take the verse number 35 in the next class. So I'll just see if I can answer a few questions. What is the difference between Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga and Swamiji's Raj Yoga? Swamiji's Raj Yoga is actually a commentary on the Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. They are basically the same. But Swamiji's Ashtanga commentary on Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga, it comes as the second part of the book. So we have till now finished only 35 verses. There are 700 verses. There are a lot of Raj Yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras still remaining, though all verses are not so important. But Ashtanga Yoga is the 8-limbed Ashtanga. Ashtanga means 8 limbs. The first limb is Yama Niyama, then Pranayama, then Asana, then Pranayama, Dharana, Dhyana, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. So these are the 8 systematic steps, and they are discussed in these sutras. But Swamiji's Raj Yoga, as I told you, is the difference is that he has explained the sutras not just by reading the commentaries of Vyasa and Bhoja, who wrote elaborate commentaries. We can get translations of that also. But Swamiji not only read that, he wanted to test it in his own life. So based on his own experience also, he is trying to explain in a way that a rational mind, a modern scientific mind, because even these vrittis, the Sanskrit vrittis, Bhoja vritti, or the commentary of Vyasa Bhashya, to understand that you need a very good grounding in Sanskrit. And there is a chance that you may misunderstand even those things. Even if the sutra by itself is so difficult to understand because they are very short and terse. When Patanjali would have taught his disciples, he would have explained it. That's why this was just for remembering. So he assumed that based on these sutras, these are like formulas. You just remember it, you know its application, then you don't have to remember the application. You know the formula. And so that is the difference between Swamiji's Raj Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga Yoga is part of Swamiji's Raj Yoga. He has discussed many other things, and 2 or 3 different elements he has combined. He has taken some Vedanta, the tradition of Vedanta, because for a comprehensive practice of these practices, you need other systems. You need to take the help of other systems. His teaching of harmony of yogas is a combination of different yogas. He doesn't depend only on Ashtanga Yoga or Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. He has some Bhakti Yoga, he has Jnana Yoga. So he has those elements are also combined here. Then we have Tantras, the Kundalini Yoga, which which was a separate yoga. It has nothing to do. Patanjali never mentions the word Kundalini. So this idea of Kundalini, what happens, how the nerve currents pass, these things have been studied in great detail. Though you get a reference to them, not the word Kundalini, but how the nerve currents flow in the human body and the human spinal cord. Those things, though the commentators, both Vyasa and uh, Bhoja, they have discussed that, because by that time, in Patanjali's yoga, which is much more older than the Tantra tradition, the Kundalini was an adaptation of the yoga into the worship of Divine Mother, Prakriti as Shakti. So Shakti and Shiva, these are the two aspects of nature. Just as we have Purusha and Prakriti, we have Shakti and Shiva. So Tantras were, uh, a Tantra is a branch of spirituality or spiritual study, which has taken the best elements of from Vedanta, from yoga, and then Swamiji has adapted them, some ideas of the Tantra, some ideas of the Vedanta, and some idea of other yogas, Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads. So he has taken the idea of prana from the Upanishads, for example. Though pranayama is mentioned as a technique, the idea of prana he has taken directly from the Upanishads, because they are our basic scriptures. Whether you follow the Tantras, whether you follow the Patanjali's yoga, whether you follow Bhagavad Gita, or you follow any other tradition, the Bhakti Shastras, the Puranas, Bhagavatam, and all those things, you will find its essence in the Upanishads. So basically, it is the Upanishads. Swamiji has tried to bring the best knowledge from the Upanishads, best knowledge from the Tantras, and combined it to the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali and given us this Raj Yoga. That is why it is a very, very comprehensive and an authentic textbook on the practice of yoga as it should be practiced. Next. If one takes initiation in later life, that is 40, does it mean they will not be able to make much spiritual? No, that is not what I mean. But it is better that these things, the spiritual practices, should be undertaken at a younger age if possible. That is the responsibility of parents to see that. But people are so busy that they think, let us first focus on the child's career, and maybe when he grows up, when he becomes old, when he is incapable of doing anything, then he can perhaps practice religion. That is why we find the religion which is practiced at an older age, not that it doesn't help, it definitely helps, but it will not be as effective if it is as it will be if it is learned from a younger age. That's all. So there is no question. It depends on the intensity also. Some people, why should we always believe that because we have started spiritual training in an older age, we were not fortunate enough to do it in a younger age, we cannot make progress? We can make progress if we are sincere, if we speed up. There are people who learn many things in a secular things when they become old. It's not necessary that everybody learns. Some people start learning late. They update their knowledge, secular knowledge, even at the advanced stage. Some people even give exams even after the age of 60. So if that can be done, if the enthusiasm is there, if the energy is there, and if the willpower is there, then age is not a limit. But as Raja Maharaj said, it is always better to start these things when one is young, because that gives a tremendous advantage. The brain cells have not worn off. You see, after the age of 32, when we start, aging process starts. Everybody knows that the nervous system becomes weak. That is why Jesus said, the spirit is strong, but the flesh is weak. The spirit is strong, then the Bible says, the spirit may be strong, but the nervous system and the condition of the body doesn't remain the same. That is why you see Swami Vivekananda and all, they completed everything before the age of 40. Luckily they came to Sri Ramakrishna, and even Sri Ramakrishna's life, he went into Mahasamadhi at the age of 50. He did not even he did not even live to see 50. He was just 49 years and a few months. So also with Swamiji. So they had to speed up their progress. So if that can be done, then age is not a bar. Age can be a factor, but one does not have to repent. We can definitely make spiritual progress. In the is the Vedantic meditation and yogic meditation different? If yes, how so? Oh, it's a very big topic. There are three types of meditation, or I should say, there are many types of meditation, but basically we can divide it into three forms of meditation, where there is a subject, there is an object, and there is a connecting link between the subject and the object. So you know you are the subject, you meditate on an external object or internal object, but it's still an object. Whether you meditate on the Ishta inside the heart or outside in a photograph or something outside, or no matter what you do, it is you who are meditating on a subject. So if the focus is more on the subject, then it is Vedantic meditation. It is known as subjective meditation. Who am I? Who am I? Like Raman Maharshi used to say, no, don't bother about who God is or what the object is. Object is not so important. Just focus on the subject. So briefly speaking, if you want to know it in a very simple manner, simple way, Vedantic meditation, or the, you may say, the Jnana meditation as Jnana, Vedanta, by Vedanta, there are three types of Vedantic. There are many schools of Vedanta. I am talking of the Advaitic method, where the subject, Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, these Mahavakyas, the discovery of self becomes the object is not so important. It is the subject. Who am I? What is this Brahman? What is this Purusha? So subjective meditation is one. Then in the Bhakti school, there is objective meditation, where God becomes important. It's not does not really matter whether you focus on the subject or the object. The focus here is how concentrated your mind is. If your mind is happy with this inquiry of who you are, the subjective meditation, then Jnana, Vedantic meditation is the meditation for you. But if you find it easy to base your meditation on some external object, through bhakti, through devotion, because you think that your Ishta, the Krishna, Rama, or any other god or goddess or deity, or your Ishta on whom you are meditating, he is greater than you. You become insignificant. The subject simply vanishes. Only the object remains. So it really doesn't matter whether the subject is given importance, subjective meditation as in case of Vedanta, objective meditation in case of bhakti schools and the devotional schools of the world. Even Christianity and all, they have more of objective meditation. They don't bother who you are, what is the self. The idea of self itself is not there. Now, there is a third technique, broadly speaking. There are many techniques, but the third technique which was developed by the Buddhists, and yogic meditation is somewhat close to this. That is known as the process meditation. What is the process meditation? Buddha said, I do not know about the object. Object obviously is God. So he says, don't bother whether there is a God or not, whether he is in heavens, whether he is a father, whether he is a mother. There are so much of conflicting ideas about God. So Buddha said, don't spoil your brain with your ideas of God. Don't bother what that God is. God may be with form, without form, he may be anything, but you don't bother about it. Then he said, what about the self? Like Vedanta, you focus on the self. What is this Purusha? What is this? Then he says, you don't even bother about that. Whether the self is eternal, whether it is, what is the nature of the self. It is so difficult to know those things. So you don't bother about the object or subject, don't bother about the object. Then what should you bother about? It is the process, the connecting link. So he says, what is connecting the subject and the object as we see it in the world? It's a very simple answer he got. It is the mind. What is the mind? It is a mental wave. If there is an object, there is a subject sees the object and then he reacts, then that is known as a mental wave. So these waves are continuously being formed. It is known as a process. So the process of thinking, the process of thought, which gives rise to reality in this world, it connects the subject and the object. If there is no object, even then there is an internal object. The mind will think of something. You close your eyes, no object, the world does not exist for you. But you can meditate on something, you can imagine something. And then still there is a subtle object and a subject. And you know that I am seeing this, I am seeing a vision, I am seeing a dream, I am in dream, for example. Even in deep sleep, when you are totally asleep, still you know when you get up that I was the one who was sleeping. So the subject still is there. So that is Vedantic meditation. They try to find out what the subject is, whereas the Bhakti school say we don't bother, we'll just go after the object. The object is the supreme thing in our life and he will he will give us the knowledge. Whereas the process meditation, according to Buddha, he says there is misery, and there is misery because we have these stupid thoughts, we have this worry, anxiety, all the misery that we experience, he says, is because of the mind, is because of the contact of the subject to the object. If the object is good, you are happy. If the object is bad, you are unhappy. And then the mind goes on fluctuating, and this disturbance of the mind itself is the problem. So Buddha says it is known as process meditation. The process itself is wrong. You just see and watch the process, and then you will see that the thoughts will become less and less and less. So that is known as the process meditation. So the Vedantic meditation, the yogic meditation comes very near the process meditation of the Buddhist, though it is not same. Patanjali says you can take up an object. So yoga is teaching you not only Vedantic subjective meditation, it teaches you objective and the process. It is a comprehensive combination of these three. We will discuss that when we discuss the Yoga Sutras in great detail. Now there is one more question from Thakur's Raj Yoga view. Thakur, or you may say Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, it is the same. Sri Ramakrishna Swamiji got his ideas from Thakur only. View on Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga Marg, is each limb complementary where all 8 can be realized in parallel, or should one master each step prior to moving on to the next? Is there a precedence, or does one need to master, say, asana before starting dharana? Normally the sequence has to be maintained, but it is also to be done parallelly. Because you are practicing asana, you can't become perfect in asana and then start pratyahara. That will never happen. So after practice, and yama and niyama, you have to practice till you die. That is why purity is insisted upon in all yogic practices. You can't say that I have finished yama and niyama. Nobody finishes yama and niyama. He has to practice all the moral virtues till he dies. So also pranayama, to some extent he is practicing and he has to practice till he dies. Similarly asanas, pranayama, then pratyahara. So before he begins meditation, before he goes into samadhi, he has to experience all these 8 steps. So they are all parallel, but at the same time, one can go step by step in developing. Once one is done with a little bit of asanas, which gives him a particular steadiness to the body, then he has to go, and not that he should not practice, but he should not get stuck at the asana level. He has to go to pranayama. Pranayama, when he does japa pratyahara, automatically pranayama happens. So he can practice pratyahara, you can practice dharana, and that meditation gives rise to control of breath. So pranayama is being practiced, and naturally when you meditate, you have to sit quietly. So sitting quietly is an asana. Sthiram sukham asanam. Sthiram sukham means that which gives you a kind of steadiness. You are not disturbed. Continuously changing positions, you should not do. So whatever gives you, makes you sit steadily for a long period of time, is known as asana. So that is the essence of asana, and that is the function of asana. Of course, there are certain yogic poses which may help the regulation of prana when there is some problem, but those things have to be done under the guidance of an expert guru. So that is what we mean by practicing it step by step, but at the same time you have to practice all all the disciplines, because it will take years and years to get perfected either in pranayama asana. So you should not wait, you should also do certain higher things as and when you feel, and as and when you are more or less established in yama niyama and pranayama and asana. So when the first four steps are taken care of, then it becomes easy for you to practice the higher forms of meditation. We'll come to that. Verse number 35 will say what concentration does. It causes extraordinary sense perceptions are seen or experienced, which give rise to perseverance of the mind. Perseverance is a quality which is very much necessary in yoga. One has to persistently go about the sadhana to make that perseverance, to increase that perseverance. One will get certain signals when such concentrations are practiced. Some extraordinary sense perceptions may come. You may call it visions, you may call it some spiritual experiences, but one should not stop, because the goal, that is only, it comes to give you some faith that you are proceeding on the right path, and that will help you in perseverance of the mind, which is the main goal. So I think the questions are over, so I'll take your leave. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. So tomorrow we have the Gospel of Holy Mother, and we will be meeting at 5:45 tomorrow.